Hello, my name is Brendan Decora, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, Pro Audio Profiles. Here, I'm going to interview recording engineers, mixers, producers, and others in the pro audio field. Together, we're going to learn how you can make amazing records that can give your listeners goosebumps. Welcome to the show. On today's show, we have Brent Hendrich. He has credits with Delanie Leclerc, Alaina Cross, and Nick Hall. Enjoy. So welcome to the show. I definitely am excited to have you on.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So you're based in Nashville, right?
I am. I've been here for 23 years now. So I moved here when I was 18 and I've been here ever since. So,
okay. Awesome. Would you mind just starting with a little bit of background, a little story of how you got to where you are, that kind of thing?
I'm happy to. I grew up in East Tennessee, and, as a kid, I just loved music. Just constantly wanted to listen to my parents' stereo, and was into electronics. I loved taking things apart. So I think that's kind of where the engineering thing started. It was like almost a combination of a lot of the music and, a lot of just very curious, I guess, as a kid. And from there, it turned into, playing in bands in high school and then going to some local studios in the late 90s and making our first record. And then that's when I was like, man, this studio environment's like amazing. I want to be in this environment all the time. And so I think like my sophomore or junior year of high school, I saved up and got just a basic like 8-in and 8-out interface and Cakewalk Pro Audio 9. It was all very basic, like the Waves native power pack. In my bedroom, our band did our second record, and it was just a great time to just learn and make some mistakes and, borrowed equipment from friends in a church and mic stands from everywhere and just tried to piece something together. So we made our record together, and that's when I kind of decided I wanted to do this for the rest of my life. And, I started looking at some options, and Nashville made a lot of sense because it was only, 5 hours away, as opposed to LA being just on the other end of the world. And so at 18, I packed up and went to a school called SAE, which is just it was a 9-month audio program, and got in there and finished that up. I guess it was like in 2001 is when I graduated that. And then from there, I started doing internships. I did 2 different internships with 2 different guys here in Nashville. One doing music for daytime television. He was kind of a principal composer for a show called Guiding Light. So we did a lot of, string recording and, instrumental kind of stuff, but also some actual original songs for the show as well. And then from there, I went to work with a guy named Pete Stewart, who was producing a lot of like kind of the rock stuff in the CCM or Christian side of things. And I grew up listening to some of that stuff, being the kid of a preacher. And so he was kind of an idol to me, in high school, and to be able to, be his kind of right-hand guy, in my, when I was 20 years old or something. It was a really amazing time. So with him, I worked on a lot of, it was more records, major label records. Right. And so I learned a ton from him as well. And then after that, he moved to California for a little while. And that was when I just decided I was ready to do this on my own, and been doing it, been freelance for, I guess, close to 20 years now here in town. So Nice. So, and do you engineer more? Do you produce at all? What do you... Yeah, that's a good question. I tell everyone I used to be like kind of a jack of all trades, where I would, I was definitely into production. That was like a big thing for me. I wanted to be like a Max Martin or Dr. Luke, that real like top 40 kind of pop producer. And so I did a lot of production, but I also engineered everything that I produced because I had that background as well from going to SAE and also just enjoying the engineering side of things. And then I would also mix it, because I was a control freak and I kind of knew what I wanted to sound like, and I was mixing as I was going. And so, I was involved in like every aspect except for mastering. I've never really had a desire to take care of the mastering side of things. I've always enjoyed outsourcing that and getting someone else's ears on it there at the end. So that was like the first, 18 or so years here in town was doing all those things. And just, finding independent artists that were looking for someone to do a single or EP or full length record, and hiring the players, booking the studios, overseeing just everything, the arrangements, working on trying to get the best performances out of the artist. And then just the past couple of years, I've kind of been rethinking some things, and mixing was always the part of the process that I enjoyed the most. I always felt like I was best at it. And I almost was just, even when I was producing, I found myself like thinking like a mixer more than a producer. And I just decided I was at a place in my career where I had a little bit more flexibility, and there's a lot of great things that come with, I think, just mixing full time. You can work when you want, when you're feeling it. You don't have people coming over to your studio all the time. I don't know. There's a lot of things that I like, when it comes to just mixing on my own. So that's what I've been doing the past 2 years, is just mixing full time. And I've been loving it. My room here in Nashville is kind of catered more towards mixing. There's no ISO booth or anything like that. So when I was producing, it was more of like, let's go here to overdub the drums, and then I could do DI bass or mic cab or something like that, or cut vocals in the room with headphones. But it's nice to finally be like really settled in. I've been in the same room working since 2008, so I know the room really well.
Oh wow.
Got the monitoring the way I want it. Really happy with the monitoring right now. Just kind of, people either in town or all over the world just send me stuff, and I do it remotely now. And I love it.
Nice. Yeah. It almost seems like that's kind of the natural, career path of most engineers, is you kind of end up in mixing most of the time. I've definitely done that myself. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I think it's a nice balance of engineering and production, kind of almost, it's a little of both of those things for me. And I think that's why I enjoy it, is I get to kind of taste both sides.
Right. So when you're producing, when you work with artists, like, do you help kind of craft their sound a bit, like their overall sound, if it's like a new artist, or how do you work with them for that?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it's all about just having conversations with them before the first note's ever recorded, and just trying to get into their heads as to, what they're looking to do. And, it's like, what is this stuff like? What does it sound like? What are some references? How would you describe it? Can we hear some demos? So it all starts from just there, doing like maybe some pre-production, just trying some different things. And so at times, yeah, go ahead.
When I'm always interested in how people do pre-production, because it kind of varies a bit. I mean, obviously there's certain standards, but if you could expand a bit on what things you do when you're doing pre-production.
Yeah. It's been a minute, but it was pretty much always the same for me. I mean, it was, let's hear, just some rough demos of what you're thinking, you want to put on this body of work. And I would just spend some time with it, listening, like kind of jotting down some ideas just by myself as to like, maybe we could trim some fat, what kind of instrumentation, thinking about tempos, is this key right? And then getting together with them and, like throwing up a click track, like, here's kind of what I'm thinking tempo-wise. Does this feel right? Does it not? Here, maybe it feels a little low in your voice. Should we try taking it up a step? This bridge is like, 32 bars. Maybe it should only be 16. Let's trim that down, So a lot of those kind of conversations, it's really, I thought of pre-production is just a time to like experiment, and just, with just either a keyboard or a guitar and a voice and a click track, it was really just that sitting in the room. It wasn't ever, well, every once in a while it was going to like a rehearsal facility and with a band and actually trying stuff like that. But for the most part, it was just, kind of simplifying things and just doing some simple arrangement, tempo, key kind of test. And then from there, then I like to always capture like once we've established the tempo and the arrangement and everything, is like put down a really solid keys pass or a guitar pass with a really solid inspiring vocal. And then from there, it's like we just start to overdub, from that point onward. Then it would usually, go to one of my buddies who is a session drummer who has it all dialed in, and we could, go there and it's super easy, bring everything back on a thumb drive, and then, start on bass, after drums are comped and edited the way I want, and then, guitars and keys, and how it goes until vocals and backgrounds are done. And then, And then, yeah, that was usually how I would do things. There was a few records here and there where we wanted a more, what I'd call like, I don't know, organic or old school approach where you want, everyone in the room together and, you want to get that chemistry and you want it to be a little bit more raw and loose. And I always felt like the best way to get that was to kind of capture more things at once. Or if the budget was really, wasn't that great, sometimes it made more sense to work that way, like work faster instead of
That's true.
take longer.
You get it all done quickly.
Yeah, I was never a fan of, I don't know, it was nice to get a lot of content quickly, but my personality, I really like to only be thinking about the drum sounds or only be thinking about the guitar sounds, because it allows me to explore. And it's like, hey, that's close, but like, let's see if we can get 20% more out of, that one part on the guitar, it's maybe we need to try a different amp real quick. And so when you're just overdubbing guitars and it's just you and the guitarist, you can, spend a lot more time doing that. So that was always my first choice when it came to working, on the production side of things.
Of course. And you mentioned, producers like Dr. Luke and stuff like that. Like, like those types of producers actually are more involved in the writing phase. Do you do that as well? Do you actually, put down parts yourself or?
For sure. It depended on the artist. Some like really had like a vision and were very much like, this is the way I want it. I don't want to mess with it. And, I'm cool with that. That's fine. I'm here to serve you. You're the artist, I'll throw out as many suggestions as you're, open to and you can take them or leave them. But yeah, and then some artists, maybe it's some girl who has a good voice and she's never recorded anything and she's, 18 and she doesn't play any instruments, but, she has a great voice and she needs some type of, product to release. And so, when it came to that, it was more of, a lot of co-writing, like, hey, let's bring in someone else as well. Maybe I can contribute to like just getting a basic beat or demo together, and bring someone else in to help, especially on the lyric side of things. That was kind of my weakest link. And so, I always liked working that way with those artists who were very new to songwriting, is just kind of collaborating with me and maybe one other co-writer. So every record was different, and I've worked in so many different genres, and I really, for a long time, enjoyed that. It was like I want to produce, engineer, and mix in all these different genres. Maybe not as much country, but a lot of like rock, pop, singer-songwriter, those are, I guess, the main genres that I work the most in. And I don't know, I always love the challenge of like having to work in a new kind of subgenre that I didn't know super, super well, and taking the time to listen to, some records, some great records from that world and try to figure out what made them, that way, and kind of just start to understand like the ingredients and like, what are the drums typically sound like? Okay, well then what kind of room in Nashville should we work in to get like drums to feel that way, and that was always, I always enjoyed that dissection part of the job.
And how do you, like when you're producing, how do you stay up to date with new music trends and, make sure you're offering fresh ideas to people? I know that can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah, just trying to spend as much time in Spotify or something comparable. That's obviously the last thing I usually want to do at the end of a long day in the studio is go out and listen to a bunch more music.
Right.
But a lot of times the artists would bring me, stuff that I wasn't familiar with. Like, hey, this is kind of what we're looking to do. I'm like, oh, this is a great band. I've never heard of them before. So that was how a lot of discovery happened. I'm trying to think of other ways. There were apps and things that I would use that were like kind of up and coming, like undiscovered tracks, because you really do need to keep your finger on the pulse. I feel like, especially if you're working in pop music, it changes so fast, and you kind of need to know where it's at and where it's going so that what you're doing is somewhat relevant, I feel like.
And how do you help artists to stay like focused and motivated during a long session?
That's a good question. See, I love this podcast because it's all about the artist. Most podcasts are about just nerdy gear stuff. And
I try to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, our job is to serve the artist, and I think
Right.
it's good to be thinking about those kinds of things. So yeah, as far as how to keep them inspired, I mean, I think just making the environment really comfortable, not like working super long days, not monitoring super loud, letting them know before we start the session what the day is going to look like. Just not pushing them too hard. Maybe if they've been cutting vocals for 6 hours, like know that we need to take a break or let's, do the rest tomorrow. It's not an emergency. It doesn't have to happen now. So those are a few things, I guess, that come to mind.
I'm actually wondering, I know like in LA, when you book a studio for the day, you get 12 hours. It's not an 8-hour day like most industries. Is it the same in Nashville? Like, how do you work with that long of a day and keep people on track,
Yeah, I typically wouldn't work book a studio and work for like big chunks like that. For example, if I'm doing an EP, let's say I was doing a 5-song EP and I wanted to go somewhere just to cut drums, me and the session drummer and, either I'm engineering or there's a house engineer. I mean, I guess that could be close to 12-hour day. That would be maybe, could be a little under, but, we generally would work, start around, maybe 10 a.m. and then I think about 6 or 8 p.m. Everyone's just kind of starts to wear down a little bit, and we've never been afraid just to like ditch a few of those hours that we're paying for, if we need to. I guess we typically would, book a day, but just not like utilize every single hour, just because. I don't know. Me and the people that have been doing it, we've been doing it for a while, and we try to treat it a little bit more like just any other job and try to have a little bit of like space, and especially if it's like a 2 or 3 day kind of thing. You don't want to burn out on that very first day if you don't have to.
Of course.
And usually the artist has no issues with that 10 hours because they're normally not in that environment, and they're super excited because, lots of times if it's their first record, especially, they're like, just the whole time they're just on cloud 9 taking photos and, in being involved. And I think as long as the songs are changing up and all that, it kind of keeps it fresh and taking, a lunch break and a couple of breaks here and there. So it's usually not an issue. It's more me just trying to make sure that I don't burn out, or if there is a session player or someone like that on the session, that they're not getting burnt out. Whereas if it's a vocal session, I'm working with the artist, then we're working here at my place and we're not really thinking about time. We're just going to work. We're going to start when we want to start, and once we're done, we're just going to stop, And that's, I think, like you said, that's important, just to make sure that, the artist is always comfortable.
And then, obviously projects vary with the budget, and you don't always have the luxury of working in awesome studios, and sometimes you have to go to like a B studio or a studio that's not amazing. What are some of the considerations you take when you're going to a place like that?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed like making really great sounding records for, very little money. That was kind of fun for me. Like, how do I get great talent and great sounds with a budget that's not that big? And the cool thing about Nashville, and I'm sure LA is the same way, is there are so many amazing people that are just focused on the session side of things, and they have so many kits or so many amps and pedal boards and guitars and all that, and they have great pre's and 57s and Royers and all these things mic'd up all the time on their cab, and drum kits like at their home, like with 16 different things that you could choose from, overheads, mono overheads, stereo overheads, rooms all over the place. I mean, everything you could ever want. And so it's just really easy. You're almost just you're really taking that studio cost and eliminating that, and you're just paying them for their time and their talents. That's how a lot of, the sessions that I did work. So it was really nice. Like I said, we'd get that pre-production demo and would go to a friend's house, and, maybe they charge like $100 a song or $200 a song or something like that, whatever it is, to put drums on per song. And then, if you're doing an EP, then maybe it's like $800 or $1,000 for drums on the entire record. And that's like what you'd pay for a day rate just for the studio,
Exactly.
And then with the bass player, it's like they could show up with 4 basses at my place and DI it in and get all
Right.
kinds of great bass sounds with a few preamps that I have here at my room. And then, guitars the same way. They could either bring their stuff here, or a lot of the session guitar players have, home studios as well.
Right.
So you could just drop by for the day, bring like just some stems or, a stereo mix or whatever, and just sit there. And when they're in their comfortable environment, it's a really great way to work. They know the room, and every amp that they own is right there, at your disposal. So that was kind of like, when you're talking, that's like a less of a pop kind of thing. If it was a pop thing, we'd just be programming a bunch of stuff here at my studio for the most part. But with musicians, that was kind of the approach that I would take. And with keys, if it's real piano, maybe it is booking like a B studio for half a day, for $400, getting the piano tuned and cutting cutting the grand piano on the entire EP, in half a day kind of thing. So, or if we wanted to organ, like a B3 or something. So that was typically how I did things.
How do you handle creative differences in the studio when artists, can't agree on something? How do you kind of manage that?
We would just talk about it. I would tell them what I think, and they could kind of tell me what they think. And, if I can't change their mind, then, I'm going to just go with what they want to do and get used to it and learn to love it over time, which usually I do. So, like I said earlier, our job is to serve the artist. They're the ones like hiring us to make, their record, and they're the ones that have to live with it, for many, many years. We move on to something else then, and so I try not to be a control freak when it comes to that. They always, the customer's always right, is the way I look at it. So, we'll talk about it. I'll try to, maybe I'll even be like, here's why I think it's a bad idea. Look at all these other examples where they do it this way as well. Or, if you listen, we could get, we could do an A/B test with someone who doesn't know, which one is your idea and which one's my idea, and let people kind of vote on it. Right. Or, I don't know, we've tried all kinds of things over the years, but, ultimately the artist has to be happy.
Of course. Can you talk about a particularly memorable experience you had with an artist?
Oh, wow. They're all like kind of memorable in different ways. There's so many moving parts. I guess one of the last records that I produced was with a group called Terce, Terce, and it's like a mother and two daughter thing. And they are very, very just, they're like old souls. They're very deep, and they have like lyrically just these great ideas, and their music is super just dynamic, and they don't want to do, what anyone else is doing. It's kind of like this folk meets cinematic thing. And so I think that record comes to mind because they had these ideas, and then I was able to like take those ideas and kind of make them all come to life. And that's what I always enjoyed doing. Just as far as shaping like a very unique drum sound. And we talked about, not wanting to use, metallic cymbals and things like that, and doing like this real warm drum thing. And we did lots of drum overdubs, and like they really liked kind of tribal kind of stuff. And we would make loops and run them through Leslie's, and just all kinds of unique things there. And then the bass was like really unique. We did a lot of like bowed upright stuff. We, used a lot of pedals, and then guitars were just all over the place. Played acoustic guitars with pencils to sound like dulcimers. And so that's a project that was fun because they were really open to, with them, it's like, we don't have to play it safe. Let's just do whatever is just feels right, and it was all about making just a great piece of art. And I always enjoy projects like that, not trying to just like chase whatever's hot at the moment and just kind of go with our gut. And some of these songs were long, and it was just the most dynamic record that I've ever been a part of, from just like super quiet piano vocal to just this wall of sound. And so, that was a memorable collaboration because they kind of had these ideas. I got to take those, and then I got to, let the musicians in on like what we were looking to do, and just to see it all come to life. I don't know, made it pretty memorable for me, and I think everyone was really proud of that record because they got to do things that they don't always, get to do in a city like Nashville, when a lot of times it is about just like playing it safe and playing like the very right
Right.
notes and all that. So it was cool. We all got to let our hair down a little bit.
Right. Do you, I know there's various studios around the world really that are kind of like retreat studios where often they'll have housing and you just go and lock yourself up in there and just work. Have you ever worked in those? Do you have experience with that?
I have. Well, I do know that like when I was first getting started and I was assisting the guy that I was talking about earlier, Pete Stewart, on a record, there was a studio outside of town that like the upstairs was, had some lodging, and the band was from Ohio. So it was nice for them that they were able to stay there. And then just every day, just come downstairs and, there was a small API there, and it wasn't the greatest of studios. It was pretty small, but we made it work. And there's some outboard gear. So that's one example that I can think of. I know there is another one in town. I'm trying to think of what it's called. It's not super well known. It's just on the outskirts of town. It's this gorgeous house. The name escapes me, but it's just a really beautiful studio. The control room it's like it's upstairs almost, and it looks down on the like this big living room with glass that kind of overlooks the hills of Tennessee. But that I think you can crash there. But most of the studios, like when I think of like the big ones like Blackbird or Sound Emporium or Ocean Way, I don't know of any lodging with any of those rooms, but there are a few.
Yeah. Can you share a specific example of when you worked with an artist who was struggling and how you helped them out?
Struggling. I mean, as a mixer, I feel like, lots of times it's like, this is my rough, I'm struggling, can you help me? I thought I could maybe mix this on my own, but, it's just not translating, so I think that's probably an example that comes to mind. I can't think of like a specific one of those recently, but since I've been mixing the past couple of years, I guess that's more how I think now. And I guess that would be when I think of struggling, that's what comes to mind is just, I've tried to get this mix to work, and or maybe it's okay with me, but the artist still doesn't feel like it's good enough. What can we do to make things better? And it's usually just kind of taking a listen to the rough, and maybe it's even just me going, hey, do these 5 things and try again, and this might just be fine as is, or I'm happy to give it a shot too. But I think lots of times that maybe comes from, it comes from a few different things, but I think sometimes it's just the monitoring environment. Certain producers that are just in, some room with very little treatment, on some monitors that are just like somewhat flat, and they're just having a hard time maybe hearing like what the bottom end's doing, or those kinds of things. So that's usually when I can kind of come in and help out is on the mix side of things.
I've actually been doing a lot more mixing myself lately, and that's always a big conversation is, how far you want me to go with the mix, away from your demo basically. And, like you said, there's some clients that are struggling with it and really don't like their mixes and are happy to do it. And it's just kind of figuring out, where they are in that scale. How do you work with them on that?
You're saying, how do I work with them on that, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess what I do is I'll always, ask for references, like other songs by other artists and mixes that they like, and kind of figure out how far they want to take it. What are some of your methods?
Yeah, this is something that I think about all the time, and it's, I've gotten in a bind in the past from not getting in their heads early on. And so now, especially if this is a new artist or producer that I've never worked with, that's when I really have to spend a little bit of time. If it's someone I've worked with for 10 years, I know exactly what they like.
Of course.
And we don't really have to, we can kind of skip those conversations. But now, no, for me, it's all about, finding out what the references are, how close to the rough mix are we going to be. I created what I call a pre-mix survey, and it's on a private link off of my website. And it's just a Google form that I created, and it allows a producer or an artist to kind of put the artist name, the title, and then, it's like, how close do we want to be to the rough? Like very close, kind of close, or do your thing. And they can check like a box. And then it's like a list of 20 adjectives, like pick these adjectives that describe the sound you're looking for. And they can check all of these different things. And do you want the vocal more on top of the mix? Do you want the vocal in the mix? Do you want the vocal really tucked? Do you want it dynamic? Do you want the mix to be like pretty squashed? Who's it going to for mastering? Anything that I can like know in advance before I ever pull up a fader, I feel like the better, because there's been times where it's like I've just kind of skimmed through the rough. No one mentioned anything about references, and I just did my thing, and it was like, whoa, like this is like we were like pretty much in love with the rough, or maybe it's not even they're not even calling it a rough. Maybe they're calling it, and we get like kind of, can you start all over, or and I feel like when you get to that point, it's sometimes hard to like rein that artist or that producer back in. Then they just think, they're just confused. They don't their bearings are off, I think. So, and I also think that having those conversations before you ever start the project, it shows the producer and or the artist like that I really care about making this as great as I possibly can. So I think that's good as well. And I just think it makes the process and mixing process go by a lot quicker. Once I know in my head, at least, like, okay, I know they want their vocal like up, and they want it dry, and I know they want it like the bass to really like hit hard, and all these things just from like a quick phone call, then I can like prioritize, kind of when I'm pulling up faders, like, okay, this and this and this, they really mentioned these things.
Right.
Or I also like hearing the rough and being like, hey, I noticed in the rough, like these couple things, I feel like I could try this on these things to make it even better. Like, what are your thoughts about that? And if they're like, great, go for it, then I will. If they're like, yeah, I don't know, then that lets me know, okay, they're really attached, to this, this latest rough that they printed. So no, that conversation, I mean, just in like 10 minutes or less, you can get a lot of good nuggets of information that will make the mix go by quicker and make your mix one connect with them, better than if you didn't do that. So yeah, I tell everyone to make sure to spend that time. It's very important.
Yeah, no, that's great. Cause often I'll ask for references and that kind of stuff, but sometimes they'll send a reference that is nothing like their song. And it's like, well, this is great, but how do I know what you're talking about here? Like, and it's really cool that you have the individual questions of how loud the vocal, how loud the bass, et cetera, So that's really interesting.
When the reference doesn't make any sense, that's when I come back and be like, okay, what is it that you really like about this reference? Oh, I just love the way that the vocal sounds. I'm like, okay, because this is the EDM track and your song's rock, So I was like trying to figure this out. But okay, you just love that vocal is like super compressed and a little bit saturated. Okay, great. Now I know what to do. So no, and I always will, not always, but lots of times I will, like if they don't give me a reference, I'll start searching around for something that's very similar to what I'm working on, just to have around, same instrumentation, same tempo, all those kinds of things. Just so, because I know that like this song seems to work for people, and it sounds good. It's got all the same kind of colors. Just to kind of have that if I do need that. I know that lots of times I've found in the past, like trying to chase a reference too hard really gets me into trouble, and so I try to limit the amount of time that I am listening to the reference, just so I don't make something something it shouldn't be. So I think trusting your gut is always the first place to start. I sometimes even will try to like listen to that reference before starting to mix, maybe like listen to that song 3 times in a row, with the computer turned off and maybe just taking some notes, like what's cool about it. And then starting to mix and trying not to, the A-B thing with the reference is what's always made a mix go like twice as long as it should and take it sometimes in the wrong direction. So you got to be careful with that.
I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide detailing my techniques for recording huge snare sounds. Check it out now at brandondecora.com/huge snare. And now back to the show. How do you keep up with new recording technologies and incorporate them into your workflow?
Well, with like plugins, for example, a lot of that kind of just hanging out with friends around town. Like, hey, have you messed with such and such? No, I haven't heard of that. Let me demo it or whatever and see what it's all about. But I'm in a place now where I'm kind of like I wouldn't say anti plugins, but I just feel like I have what I need, and I've been buying way less plugins than I used to a couple years ago. Now it's like maybe a couple a year or something. It's crazy.
Right.
Yeah. So as far as keeping up with trends, I mean, I'm not really, I've always been an in the box mixer. So I never really am thinking about outboard gear at all, unless I'm on a tracking session, which I don't really do many of those anymore. And for monitoring, when I upgraded early last year to my Neumann 310s, did a lot of research on like what were just super detailed, super flat monitors, because I've always enjoyed working. It just makes sense to me to work on a flat speaker. They're not always exciting, but I think they help well with translation. Right. So that was just a lot of, just message boards and just reading, looking at specs and things like that, trying out a lot of different things, so sometimes it's like, going to Vintage King and listening to 10 different sets of monitors, or going over to my buddies, listening to his PMCs and my other buddies' ATCs, and just seeing like what I connect with. So that's how I was, I guess, keeping up with the monitoring side of things. With music, it's just, playlist, trying to listen to, I like mixing pop is my favorite thing to do. And so I listen to like Spotify Pop Rising and Fresh Finds Pop almost every week, just to kind of see, sonically where those are at. So that would be the music side of things. And then I'm always just, I'm still a curious person. I keep up a lot with like things that aren't quite music related, but I feel like are going to be, in the near term, like when AI is something that I keep up with a lot. And I'm very curious with like how AI is going to start interacting with like production and mixing and those kinds of things. So those are the like trends that interest me the most right now, is things like, Chat GPT and the idea of, getting an API to connect with, the DAW and being able to, utilize that as like an assistant and, that kind of stuff interests me a lot more than something like Atmos personally, but that's just me.
Right. So is there any current or recent projects you can talk about?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I just mixed a song last week for a pop artist. She's based out of Nashville here. Delanie Leclerc is her name, and she's got a really big following. It's just, I don't know, it's kind of like Chelsea Cutler or something. It's got a very, top 40 kind of sound. That's like the most exciting thing the past couple of weeks I've worked on, just because, I mentioned I'm now just strictly mixing. And then this year it's all about trying to mix at least 50%, of the music that comes through being in the pop genre. So this was like right up my alley. And that's why it comes to mind, just because like the sounds were the kind of sounds that I love. I think I'm just like burnt out on a lot of live instrumentation, especially live drums. Something about just having like great sounding, samples and just like a 808, but it's also hi-fi. And I think being like, I describe myself as like a precise kind of mixer. I just want to like push things and like take use every little frequency available. And so pop music allows me to just, I don't know, it's just more exciting and that's why I love, working in pop. And that song I think I think it's coming out in a couple of weeks. So I'm excited to put that on the reel, just because it allows people to hear what I feel like I do really well. So, yeah.
Nice. So I like to, finish each episode with the same standard questions. The first one is, what is your most influential teacher?
Probably the first two, guys that I mentioned early on when I was doing my backstory. Brian Seward, who, has won a ton of Emmys doing music primarily for television. He was a big time teacher for me. He taught me, he really helped me like learn how to record piano and strings. And it was the first time I started learning how to use tuning software. I think it was like the early days of auto-tune. There was like a manual side or something as well. And I remember like him kind of showing me how to do some of that, how to deal with like people, that was something that I really didn't know much about. And that's super important, as you know. And just, trying to, get the best performances out of people. He was really good at that. And then working with Pete as well. Pete, I was kind of in a way, his engineer, but I had very little experience other than working a little bit on, the SSL and the Neve at SAE for a brief stint. But, we went into a couple of studios and I kind of was just learning as I went along. And so I think with him, he allowed me to learn just kind of the hard way and trial by fire and made some mistakes and just figured it all out as I went along. Yeah, with him, he let me, I was doing a ton of like drum editing. That was like when it was all just doing beat by beat kind of stuff was in style and, didn't have, back then. Maybe Beat Detective was around, but I've never really been a Pro Tools user. And he was using, it was like Paris, I think, EQ Sonic, or I don't know if you remember that. This was like 2002 or 3 or something. You had like this big computer and it had like a control surface. The converter sounded really nice, but he was like the only person that used the thing. So yeah, it was, I'm trying to think of what else, I learned from them. I mean, yeah, just how to even just modern production techniques, like how, if you want your guitars to sound big, you double them, or, here's, you stack all of these things and this is how you get this sound, or, this is the kind of guitar that acoustic you should record typically if you want like this kind of sound, so just learning those kinds of things. I mean, I tell people going to school, like SAE, that's good for maybe like learning signal flow and what a compressor does and all that. But if you want to really learn how records are made, then, the internships are where it's at. So I think having a little bit of both of those is good. Nice. And then now I learn more from either just other friends that are in the industry, it's like, they're like, oh man, I tried such and such on my mix bus the other day and it sounds amazing. And then I try it and I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm going to steal this now, so I learn in, ways like that. Podcasts like this, I listen to a lot of audio podcasts, YouTube, every once in a while mix with the masters, and then listening to, records that some of my favorite mixers, do. I'm a big fan of Chad Blake. And so I listen to his stuff, and then Serban is like on the other side of things, and so if I want to, listen more on the abstract side of things, it's, with Chad, and it's Serban if I want more of that like hi-fi pop thing. And so, I'll listen to those mixes in my room and try to figure out what they're doing. And just by doing that, even just a little bit of dissection, I learn a lot that way as well.
Nice. So the next question is, what is your favorite reference track? If you have to go into a new studio and you need to figure out what the room sounds like, what do you put on? Yeah, I have on Spotify, if anyone wants to check this out, I've been building this playlist. It's a public playlist, and it's called Studio Monitor Demo Playlist. Studio Monitor Demo Playlist. That's what it's called. And it's got probably like 30 or 40 tracks on it. And they're all it covers every genre, and they're just songs that I think sound great in my room with my monitoring. And so I will listen to those if I just want to listen to something they're not necessarily like I need to take a quick break, or I don't use them to like go A and B with work that I'm doing as much as just like if I want to sit down and listen to like records that I think sonically are perfect, then I'll listen to those. But then I also use that playlist if I am going in to a new room, let's say for 2 days to, overdub drums on something. There is the time here and there where I am engineering projects on the front end that I will eventually be mixing, which is something I enjoy doing. And so if that's the case, I have to get, familiar with the room. That's always one of the hardest things for me, is working in this room for months on end. And then all of a sudden, being on a different set of monitors, usually I'll bring my monitors, but being on new monitors in a new room is just like, speakers,
whoa. Yeah. I typically do. I hate doing it, but, that at least that like makes it a lot easier. Then it's just, the room just becomes the issue. But if it's a good room, then I'm in a pretty good spot. So I'll listen to this playlist there as well for maybe, I usually don't have a ton of time, maybe if it's just even 10 or 15 minutes just to kind of get my bearings. But I will say usually I'll leave a commercial studio going, I think this all sounds good, but I won't really know until I'm in my room, because that's like 99% of the time where I'm listening, and that's where I know what works and what doesn't. So I even like to bring my Sennheiser HD 600 open back headphones, because there's been a lot of times where it's like I'm in a rough studio, the monitors I don't love, and the room is awful, and I would much rather just put on my headphones and make a lot of decisions that way. That's kind of like, that's my traveling studio monitors is kind of what I call them.
Right.
So anytime I traveled like a new city and I don't know what I'm going to be up against, I at least have those in a case that I can put on. And those have saved me many times before. So
nice.
Yep.
So last question
is...
as
far as what you probably want to know some specific songs though, right? And I never really did
list
that.
off like top 3.
Let me give you like 2 or 3 or something. Yeah. For pop, I will say Lotto has a song called Big Energy that I really think just like sounds massive, like so open and bouncy. And Billie Eilish has a song called Bury a Friend where the bottom end is just massive. So if I want to like really get like a sub, working, I love listening to that. For rock, Superposition by Young the Giant, I really love like that mix a lot, those drums. And then there's a artist Bahamas. He's got a song called Lost in the Light. I really like that for more of a intimate acoustic kind of stripped down kind of thing. Those are just like 3 or 4 that are on that massive playlist.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Those are some I like.
Sweet. Awesome. So the last question is, what would be one tidbit for an upcoming engineer?
Yeah, and I've heard you ask this question before, and I started thinking about it, the other day when you were asking someone else, and I'm like, that is a good question. A lot of people ask me that, and I kind of have a few things actually. Maybe we'd call it like bonus. I could be really quick.
Sure.
I think the first one that comes to mind for me is figuring out like where if you're just getting started, like where do you eventually want to be? If you're like you find yourself, I really like engineering the most, and I want to be engineering like whatever major label rock records, then start to get on that path as quickly as you can. I think for me, I was just so in love with every aspect of the process that it was like, yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do. And I got a little distracted. I was too spread out. I think for someone, for example, that wants to, be engineering rock records for the rest of their life, they need to start, working in that genre as much as possible and building relationships with the producers who are making those kinds of records and being like just hyper focused on getting from point A to point B, instead of, I'll put guitar on this pop thing today. And then, tomorrow, I'll master whatever that hip hop record. And, I think that kind of, can be distractions if you're not careful. I mean, I realize you also have to be paying the bills. And I think that's kind of what got in the way for me was saying yes to everything so I could pay the bills as a young producer and engineer. But do your best to kind of figure out where you want to go and then try and just, like I said, be just hyper focused as you can. And because that's kind of what I'm doing now. I have the flexibility more than I ever have before. And so now that I know like mixing pop music is what I want to do more than anything else, like that's where my head's at every day now. So that's the first piece of advice. I think 3 other really quick ones. Get in the reps. The more you do something, the better you're going to be. If you want to be a pop mixer, then like just get as much content as you can get your hands on, even if that means doing some stuff for free for somebody, or finding some multi-track website and snagging multi-tracks. It's just like anything else, like working out or, training for a marathon. You need to be out there every single day. Your legs will get stronger. Your lungs will get stronger. Same thing with your ears. If you're mixing every single day, you'll just get so honed in. And, 10,000 hours, you'll be really good. 20,000, you'll be even better. 30,000, you'll be, so I think just being active is also important. The third, invest in your monitoring. I feel like that's something that a lot of people they get all into. I want a bunch of outboard gear and all these mics and things that make a small difference, but then they're maybe they have this great mic and outboard collection, but they're mixing on some $400 pair of monitors in a room with zero treatment. And I tell everyone every decision that you make is based on what you're hearing. And if you have all this great gear, but you're like in this echo chamber, you're just not making the best decisions. So that's another thing. I'm just a big fan of, maybe that's because I'm a mixer, monitoring is important to me. And I like to be able to hear, all the little details. The last thing is, if you're considering a 4-year school, maybe don't. If you're wanting to do this, I feel like at the most, doing like a technical school or something like that, where you're in and out and you're just learning, just the basics. I feel like internships are going to be a better place to learn. Even getting a subscription to things like Mix with the Masters and all that, that's, I think, really good. I guess what I'm saying is, like, no one really cares if you have some like 4-year degree from some school that you paid $150,000 to go to, so don't get too focused on that. I know that some, kids, like, their parents kind of almost require that of them, and that's a whole nother thing. But if you have, I think, the flexibility, maybe just get in and just start getting your hands dirty right away, as opposed to getting, a 4-year late start, and is the way I kind of looked at it. But it's different for everyone. If you're going to maybe teach audio or something, then that's one thing. But if you're wanting to, be making records for a living, then I think it's maybe best just to skip that. So those are a few things I would tell that, 18-year-old me.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
It was definitely a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had a blast too.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Thanks so much for listening to the show. As you know, I'm just getting this started, and I'd love your feedback on how I'm doing, if I should keep this going, what your thoughts are. Feel free to visit proaudioprofiles.com and send me a message. Until next time.